Hello. Hey guys, I am back. Sorry, I meant to come back a couple days ago and continue the attorney talk, but got a little busy. I have seen a couple of videos though that I wanted to share with you guys. I thought they were interesting. Let me see here. So I want to start off with this one. Let me see. Share screen. All right, so I just want to go in here real quick and show this comment. I thought this was great for the Federal Reserve video that we made talking about how, we're all enslaved by this money. And one of the comments I got was, "This is why we Bitcoin." And I thought that was an excellent comment because I wanted to show you guys a couple of videos. Let's see here. So I'm going to start with this one. It's really good. It's by like a financial guru guy. He's got 2.69 million subscribers. So let's see what he has to say. I thought it was great because I have another video to play right after this that kind of explains a little bit more kind of what he's talking about. I guess I'll try to point out what he's talking about. So let's see. Sorry.
The US owe all of this money to? And who are the mysterious landowners that control 1.3 billion acres, from mega landlords like the Emersons to John Malone all the way to Bill Gates? Or maybe it's the tech overlords that harvest 175 zettabytes of data that track everything we do online. This is an incredibly deep rabbit hole, and over the course of this video, I'm going to help explain the different forms of control and how they've evolved throughout history. From land, money, to corporations, to debt, and so much more. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly who controls the country. And stick around because I'll show you what I think the real answer is and what I think is also the solution. So with that said, let's get into it. Hi, my name is Andre Jick. Hope you're doing well. Come for the finance and stay for the Illuminati. Now, in the 19th century, owning a land was one of the ultimate ways to control and own the country. Under something called the Pacific Railway Act of 1862, Congress actually gave 174 million acres of public land to the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads, which were sections of land that stretched for miles. And then something really interesting happened. Union Pacific insiders set up something called the Credit Mobilier Construction Company, and they quietly gave out discounted or even free shares of this company to key congressmen and people in power to make sure that in return, they would get friendly legislation and funding. And when all of this broke out in 1872, it exposed how land grants could actually influence politics and give total corporate control of new territories. Now, fast forward to today, and a small group of mega landlords still control disproportionate amounts of power over local economies and politics. Private owners, for example, control 1.3 billion acres, or about 60% of US land. Now, some of those families are maybe names you've never heard of, like the Emerson family, which control over 2.4 million acres, or John Malone at over 2.2 million acres. Even tech CEOs like Bill Gates have bought up over 200,000 acres of farmland across 18 states. In Nebraska alone, for example, his Mount Edna Farms LLC now controls over 20,000 acres. And people are starting to get worried because if any of it went tax exempt and became a nonprofit, then that would mean all the counties that are around it could see their property tax revenues destroyed. And that could negatively affect schools and services and everything else. So whoever owns land still holds a huge amount of power. They can control who gets tax money, voting districts, and which resources go where. So that's the first aspect of who owns and controls America. Those who control a lot of land. Now, if land was the original source of power, then credit was the evolution of it. And it still hugely owns not just the US, but the entire world. And the origin story of how credit came to be is going to sound like a total conspiracy, but it's not. In November 1910, a secret group of US bankers led by JP Morgan, National City, the First National Bank of New York, and a few other big banks under Senator Aldrich's sponsorship. They all met here, a place called Jekyll Island. Their goal was to create the Federal Reserve Act in order to control the supply of America's money. Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. Now that was a very famous quote that is oftentimes attributed to Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Now, the Rothschild family built the blueprint of central banking in the 1800s. But when it came to America's actual money printer, the family, despite all the endless conspiracy theories, supposedly never held direct ownership over the Fed. Instead, the Fed is owned by the smaller commercial US banks. And when Congress passed the act in December 1913, it created the 12 regional reserve banks. And all of them were given the superpower to do what's called fractional reserve banking. And that allows the banks to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and lend the rest of it to someone else. Now, this is going to blow your mind, but here is how it used to work up until very recently. Let's say you deposit $100 with your bank. Now that bank can loan up to $90 of your money to someone else. The other $10 is reserved for you in case you need it. That's called vault cash. Now your bank account will still show you having $100, but on the bank side though, that $100 deposit just created another $90 for the bank to lend out. Now let's say someone borrows that $90 of technically your money, and then they pay someone for something that they bought. Then that person goes to deposit their $90 with their bank, and that bank also gets to do the exact same thing and lend out 90% of it. And this process can repeat until there's up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by only $100 of vault cash. Now, believe it or not, that's how it used to work. But as of March 2020, that system changed. And now the Fed has lowered the reserve requirement to 0%, meaning there's no reserve requirement for banks. They can lend out the maximum amount of everything you deposit, of course, under the Fed's guidance. Now today, our central bank, the Federal Reserve, has over $6 trillion on their balance sheet. And they also get to control things like the mortgage rates, which is based on the 10-year Treasury bond, corporate credit, and the purchasing power of our paychecks. And to this day, the president does not have control or authority over the Fed, and he cannot fire the person in charge of it. And that's why some people say that if a handful of banks get to decide who creates dollars and how many of them, then that's one way to own a country. Now, if banks control the money, then who controls and owns the US stock market? Now, there's a lot of interesting theories out there, but probably the most popular one is the Holy Trinity: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street.
BlackRock is the subject of a lot of speculation online.
There is a robot that controls more wealth than any country on Earth.
Really, the commander-in-chief is Larry Fink.
They have stock in 95% of Fortune 500 companies, and they've been hired by governments across the world to help manage financial crises and even just conduct normal operations.
Imagine if you have control of 88% of CEOs of S&P 500 companies. What kind of influence do you have?
Now, you've probably heard the claims that BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, or the big three, own the stock market. And the truth is that this is so wrong and so right at the same time. It's wrong because, yes, they do manage trillions of dollars, but most of that money belongs to everyday investors like you and me. So technically, they're just managing our money, not owning the world outright. But it's true that they do have a huge amount of power and control, So much so that Charlie Munger once famously said, "I think the world of Fink, but I'm not sure I want him to be my emperor." So let me break down why their power is very real and how it actually works. Now, the central bank is not the only thing that can create money into existence. The stock market can also make its own special form of money. You see, public companies can create new shares of their company. For example, a company called MicroStrategy does this all the time. They do that so they could buy more Bitcoin. And by creating new stocks and new money, they can double down and buy more Bitcoin to hopefully make their stock worth even more. But the question is, who gets to decide which companies get to do that? Well, it turns out it's the company itself, the company's own board of directors. And if the dilution's big enough, technically the shareholders as well. But here's where BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street come in to sort of run the show. They can't call up the CEO of Strategy and be like, "Hey, Michael, you're fired." But they do vote on who becomes members of the board of a company. And those people can make those decisions. They can vote on director elections, and those people can influence company policy. But they also have another superpower. The big three have a vested interest in almost every company in the S&P 500, with roughly $23 trillion under management and proxy votes on about 90% of US stocks.
The three of them combined are the major stockholders of 95% of American corporations. How's that?
That's not good.
That's power.
And what that means is when your average mutual fund or ETF, like VTSAX from Vanguard, needs to vote on something, it turns to one of those three giants to cast your proxy. A proxy is just the legal permission given to them by you to vote your shares at a company meeting when you can't be there yourself, which is the case for most working people with a job. Now, personally, I don't ever vote on anything. I have the right to, and I get all the letters in the mail. I just don't have the time or interest to. You're probably in the same boat. So instead, Vanguard's stewardship team analyzes those proposals against their policy and gets to vote on your behalf. So even though the big three don't technically own the stock market, their voting power does have a lot of weight and by extension, a lot of power. And that's why some people say, well, if just three asset managers hold the biggest voting blocks in almost every major company in existence, then who really owns corporate America? Now, if banks and corporations can borrow infinite amounts of money, and if the country can do the same by selling its treasury bonds, then who does the US owe its money to? Well, here's our debt so far. That's a lot of money. And who is it owed to? Before we get into that, though, I want to quickly mention taking back control of your own economic energy. That's why this video is brought to you by Kraken. Kraken is a US-based cryptocurrency exchange founded in 2011 and is the official crypto exchange and partner of Williams F1 and Tottenham Hotspur. Since 2011, Kraken has built a reputation on rock-solid security and transparent proof of reserves, so you know your assets are protected at every layer. Kraken's interface is designed to be easy for both beginners and advanced. So here's the breakdown. At the end of last year, in 2024, the United States had over $36 trillion in gross federal debt, which is roughly 120% of something called the GDP, which means more than a full year's worth of all goods and services the US makes, we are now in debt. Now, out of that 36 trillion, though, about 80% of the debt was held by public investors, with the rest of the 20% recorded as intergovernmental debt. Of the 29 trillion held by the public, foreign investors in other countries owned about 8.5 trillion or 30%, including 1.8 trillion split between Japan and China. That's why you've probably heard the rumor that China and Japan own the US and they could collapse the US by selling all of their treasury bonds and just dump them all in the market. But that would probably never happen because here's the catch. Selling that many treasury bonds would collapse bond prices, which would increase interest rates through the roof, and it would destroy the value of their holdings too. In other words, the biggest foreign owners of US debt have just as much of a reason to keep our borrowing costs as low as we do. The more US treasuries a country owns, the more their economy is tied to the fate of the US economy. So it's kind of ironic and counterintuitive, and no, foreign countries don't actually control the US. In reality, the single biggest holder of public debt is the Federal Reserve, with over $6 trillion on its balance sheet. Now, that debt is owned by investors like state and local pension funds, banks, insurance companies. If you own treasuries or bonds, as people call them, you are part of that. And you own a part of America's future tax revenue, and you make money when the government pays interest. So if you're a bondholder, you partially own America. The problem is, at a certain point, investors don't want to lend money to the US because our debt is considered risky. Can the US sustain itself on this path forever? Most economists say no.
The US federal debt is on an unsustainable path. It's not at an unsustainable level, and no one really knows how much further we can go. You know, we're running very large deficits at full employment, and this is a situation that we very much need to address. Sooner or later we'll have to, and sooner is better than later.
And if you're going to lend your money to someone that is considered very risky, that's on an unsustainable path, you would want a higher interest rate for giving them your money. That means the more money we print and the more treasury bonds we create, the US has to incentivize investors with higher and higher rates. And that will cost the country more and more in interest. It's the infinite feedback loop. That's one of the reasons why President Trump wants to lower interest rates so the US could refinance at a more reasonable level. Now, if companies and banks can print unlimited amounts of money and the US has so much debt, then couldn't we just change the system and vote the right people into power and just make it all better? Turns out that's really hard to do. And nowhere is that becoming more clear than politics. In 2024, for example, 100 billionaire families spent a record $2.6 billion in federal races, about 1/6 of total spending. The top 50 individual donors gave out $2.5 billion, with Republican-leaning contributions outpacing Democrats about 2-1. If you remember, Elon Musk was actually a big part of that, and he donated hundreds of millions of dollars, mostly to President Trump's causes. But there's also Miriam Adelson, who gave out over $100 million in 2024, and she's one of the GOP's biggest donors. There's also Timothy Mellon, who gave out $197 million to elections, almost all to Republican-led super PACs. Add $1.9 billion in estimated dark money spending, but it's also the same story. His Open Society foundations spent at least $140 million into organizations in 2021, on top of more than $170 million he contributed personally during the 2022 midterms. And in the 2024 cycle, the Soros family-funded groups like the Texas Organizing Project got $600 grand, and state Democratic parties in Wisconsin and Ohio got $250,000 each from Soros-affiliated entities. Now, this rabbit hole goes so deep, but for the purpose of this video, the point here is that the system spends a huge amount of money to influence who runs for politics, how things are the way they are, and who the winners and losers ultimately get to be. But all this sort of brings me back to the original question of who controls and owns the country. And I think the answer is, it depends on what you value. Some people, for example, don't value money. They value political control. Some people value social control and the ability to say things that they want without a consequence. There's a lot of levels to this. There's no one entity that controls all of it. So what do you value? For me, the thing I value most is my economic energy. Like this bill right here, it represents a small part of my energy. I converted my time into skills and my time and skills into this, right? It's another form of energy. And I can also convert it into something else, like food or shelter. But unfortunately, someone controls this form of energy already because they have a magic button that they can just press, which zaps this energy away from me. Now, I can't actually see it vanishing, but I feel it when I go shopping. And I realize that the time I spent to get this buys me less of the things I want. And that's what rich people kind of figured out, the solution to that problem. And it's called a store of value. They figured out that if they can convert that form of energy into something else, like stocks, real estate, or art, they can keep more of their economic energy for themselves for longer. Now, some of the most efficient forms of energy they found are things like stocks, beachfront property, gold, and art. And that's why those assets have what's called a premium. A premium is to pay more than what something might be worth. But think about it. Why is there a premium? At the end of the day, a house is a house, a car is a car, a thing is a thing. There's no real reason from a utility perspective why one house should be worth the average and another worth millions and millions, except for its ability to hold and store value. That's the primary reason there's a premium. Rich people are happy to pay more for those things than they are intrinsically worth, because those things store their economic energy more efficiently. How special is that thing beyond its utility, and how desirable will it be to others in the future? That desirability is tied through the lens of economic energy. And that's the quadrillion-dollar question. Which one of them is the best for that? I promise you, I don't want this to be a Bitcoin pitch video, but I'm going to leave you with this. It's a tweet I saw from Tad Smith, and it might open up your mind to an idea. In 2017, a famous Basquiat painting sold for $110.5 million. It was the most expensive Basquiat painting sold at the time. Bitcoin was worth about $2,000 a coin, which meant the buyer could have spent 55,000 Bitcoins to buy this painting. But fast forward to July 2025, and Bitcoin is now $117,000. That same $110 million painting would only need 941 Bitcoins. Now, in dollar terms, that painting went up in value. It preserved its economic energy. Awesome. But if you measured it against a different economic energy, Bitcoin, then you'd actually realize the painting lost 98% of its value. Now, the same is true of real estate. What was the average cost of a house a couple years ago? How many Bitcoins did it take to buy one? From 2016 to 2024, the average house went up over 50% relative to dollars. That's insane. It preserved economic energy. Awesome. But relative to Bitcoin, it lost 99%. In fact, from 2020 to 2025, the average house again lost over 80% of its value. Bitcoin is draining all of the premium out of those assets, and it is sucking it up as more and more money realizes that this specific form of energy is superior for the purpose of protecting economic energy. And that's why every asset class will continue to depreciate when measured against it. And as more and more money understands those benefits, it will continue to tell that same story. What those benefits are, though, I'm going to leave it up to you to study. Bitcoin's not for everyone, and I get that. But if you value preserving the value of your time, then you might want to read into it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I'd love to see you back here next week, and I'd love to get your thoughts. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
So that was interesting. And I wanted to, when he was talking, he said when the federal bank, he kept saying, I don't know exactly who. And I'm pretty sure we know who owns America. But it was just interesting because when he said the feds just hit a magic button, and I was just like, it's not a magic button, though. It is law. That's the problem. It's not a magic button. It is law. And that is our problem. So I wanted to show this one because I thought it was very interesting. It kind of talks about, well, it doesn't kind of talk. It's just really interesting. But in here, I'll see if I can't pause. I apologize. I have to mute my mic sometimes because my dogs hate when I talk to the computer. They're like, no, talk to me. So let me see. I'm going to start this up. I'll try to pause it right where I'm trying to show you where the magic button gets hit. I'm pretty sure you guys might be able to figure it out, but let's see. Oh.
Money being naturally barren to make a history of central banking and the enslavement of mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson. Chapter 1. How usury destroyed the Roman Empire. Money being naturally barren to make it breed money is preposterous and a perversion from the end of its institution, which was only to serve the purpose of exchange and not of increase. Men called bankers we shall hate, for they enrich themselves while doing nothing. Aristotle, Politics. The monetary systems of the Roman era, 753 BC to 565 AD, may be divided into three distinct periods where units of three different metals were used as the means of exchanging goods and services. Although there is evidence of modern human occupation, Homo sapiens sapiens, in the Rome area going back 14,000 years, with Neanderthals having lived there approximately 140,000 years ago. Rome as a city is traditionally said to have been founded by Romulus and Remus in 753 BC in a region surrounding the Palatine Hills, also known as Latium.
I just want to pause again real quick because this is also a really good history of America. Because if you don't know, America is the replication of Rome, and it's literally about to just go through our history here in a second. So you'll be able to see what I'm talking about.
According to the legend, Romulus, who killed his brother Remus, became its first king, but later shared the throne with Titus Tatius, the ruler of the Sabines. Around 600 BC, Latium came under the control of the Etruscans. This lasted until the last king, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled in 509 BC and the Roman Republic was established. The Etruscans, a people of Aryan origin, created one of the most advanced civilizations of that period and built roads, temples, and numerous public buildings in Rome. The first money used in Rome was the cow. This was not true money, but a barter system. Many early peoples used cattle as a medium of exchange. According to the legend of Heracles in the Aegean stables, the cattle kept there, over 3,000 in number, represented the treasury of King Aegeus. The Copper Age, 753 to 267 BC. As time went on, the Romans took to using, instead of cattle, irregular lumps of copper or bronze. These lumps were called ius rude, rough metal, and had to be weighed for each transaction. There was an increase in trade, and Rome became one of the most prosperous cities in the ancient world. This prosperity was based on uncoined copper, later bronze, metal which was measured by weight according to a fixed system of units. It was issued by the Roman treasury in the form of ingots weighing 3.5 pounds, 1.6 kilograms, with the full backing of the state, and was known as ius signatum, stamped metal, because it was stamped by the government with a cow, eagle, or elephant or other image. Sometimes they were made to resemble a scallop shell. In 289 BC, these ingots were replaced by discoidal, cast-leaded bronze coins, ius grave, heavy metal. They represented national money and were paid into circulation by the state, and each was only of value inasmuch as the symbols on which its numbers were recorded were scarce or otherwise. This money was thus based on law rather than the metallic content, although that content was standardized.
This money was thus based on law. Law, guys.
and the coin did have some intrinsic value, unlike most coins today. This can be considered as an early example of the successful use of fiat money. While fiat money is much criticized in some quarters, for example by the followers of Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises, there is nothing wrong with it as long as it is issued by government, not by private bankers, and is carefully protected against counterfeiters. Non-fiat money, in contrast, has the serious drawback that
Except when bankers are ran by, when governments are ran by private bankers. That's the difference. And that is the confusion crap that they have infused so that we can't tell the difference. So that when you're arguing with somebody, especially a lawyer, they'll be like, but in the law it says, but it says. And I'm like, yeah, because you guys just created it out of your butt.
whoever sets the prices of gold and silver, i.e. private bankers, can control the nation's economy. Up to 300 BC, there was an unsurpassed increase in public and private wealth of the Romans.
Sorry, I apologize. I just also wanted to reiterate that fiat is by decree because I say so. That's what fiat means, And so again, who the HE double hockey sticks is the authority to just decree whatever, whenever. The law.
This may be measured in the gain of land. After the conclusion of the Second Latin War in 338 BC and the defeat of the Etruscans, the Roman Republic increased in size from 2,135 square miles, 5,525 square kilometers, to 10,350 square miles, 26,805 square kilometers, or 20% of peninsular Italy. In tandem with the expansion of its land area, the population rose from about 750,000 to 1 million, with 150,000 persons living in Rome itself. A partnership was formed between the Senate and the people known as Senatus Populusque Romanus, SPQR, the Senate and people of Rome. The political leaders were renowned for their frugality and honest virtue. The means of exchange was strictly regulated in accordance with the increase in population and trade, and there was zero inflation. Debt bondage nexum, whereby a free man offered his services as security for a loan plus interest, and where in cases of non-payment the debt had to be worked off, was abolished after plebeian agitation by the Lex Potelia in 326 BC. The Silver Age, 267 to 27 BC. The traditional money system was
It's about to get really interesting.
destroyed in 267 BC when the patrician elite attained the privilege to mint silver coinage. This change was typified by a patrician who went to the temple of Juno Moneta, from which the word money is derived, and converted a sack full of silver denarii to 5 times its original value by the simple expedient of stamping a new value on the coins. He thus pocketed a very substantial difference in seigniorage for his own private account. The early Roman silver coin was known as the drachma, and was modeled on a coin used in the Greek south of the peninsula. It was later replaced with a smaller and lighter denarius. There was also a half denarius called the quinarius, and a quarter unit called the sestertius. Still later, the system was supplemented with the victoriatus, somewhat lighter than the denarius and probably intended to facilitate trade with Rome's Greek neighbors. There were very few deposits of silver in the Italian peninsula, and as a consequence, the Roman army had to be expanded in order to conquer territories to obtain supplies. The Roman peasants, who had provided the Republic with food independence, were drafted in increasing numbers into the army. Agricultural production, especially corn, declined, and the peasant farms were replaced by latifundia, which were large estates worked by slaves. Wheat also had to be imported from North Africa. Tensions about granting citizenship and enfranchisement between Rome and her Italic allies resulted in the Social War from 90 to 89 BC. This lack of enfranchisement had led to their
That's literally what happened to us. We were granted citizenship and enfranchisement into this incorporated America, like Rome. They've not, they're just continuing. There's nothing new under the sun, guys. If you don't learn about your history, you will be doomed to repeat it.
fragmentation of Roman society and the alienation of the working class citizens, who were treated as chattel and who had no responsibilities and therefore no commitment towards the state. Until as late as the Second Punic War, from 218 to 201 BC, they were not allowed to serve in the army. This was a classic example of a society which had been monetarized. The Republic was weakened and there was increasing despotism. Piracy became a major problem, with raids taking place on the coast, villas being sacked, and travelers kidnapped. Violence became endemic and gangsters and terrorists were active in Rome, as there was no police force to maintain law and order. These are inevitable consequences of a society in which money had become the highest ethos. There was also political intrigue amongst the elite. Economic deprivation caused discontent amongst the poor, who were increasingly slaves from North Africa, and social unrest. This turmoil culminated in the revolt led by Spartacus in 73 to 71 BC. The first and second revolts were in 135 to 132 BC and in 104 to 100 BC. The Jewish role in the collapse. The first known Jews who arrived in Rome in 161 BC were Yehuda and Maccabee. These early Roman Jews employed themselves as craftsmen, peddlers, and shopkeepers. In the last occupation, they also indulged in money lending. As a community, they lived separately in apartments. They governed themselves according to their own laws and were exempt from military service. In 139 BC, the Jews, who were not Roman citizens, were expelled by Praetor Hispanus for proselytizing, but they soon returned. In 19 AD, by means of a Senatus Consultum, Emperor Tiberius expelled 4,000 Jews who had...
Wait, what? In 139 BC? They were kicked out? Is that number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, what number one was that?
Had been involved in various scandals, but none of these expulsions was properly enforced, and their continued presence, in particular as usurers, would play a significant role in the decline and collapse of the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, 100 to 44 BC, was born into an aristocratic family on July 12, 100 BC. He was tall and fair-headed and practiced briefly as a lawyer before becoming a brilliant military commander who conquered Gaul, France, in 59 to 52 BC. After his defeat of Pompey the Great in 48 BC at Pharsalus, Caesar became the undisputed leader of the Roman Republic. On his return to Italy in September 45 BC, Caesar found the streets and cities crowded with homeless people who had been forced off the land by usurers and land monopolists.
Does that sound familiar?
300,000 people had to be fed daily at the public granary. Usury was flourishing with disastrous consequences. The principal usurers, many of whom were Jewish, were charging interest rates as high as 48% per annum. As Lucius Annaeus Seneca, 4 BC to 65 AD, the philosopher, would later remark in De Superstitione, the customs of that most criminal nation have gained such strength that they have now been received in all lands. The conquered have given laws to the conqueror. At that time,
Wait. What did it just say? Sorry.
laws to the conqueror. At that time, there were two main political parties, the optimates, centered around the nobility, the Senate, and the privileged few, and the populares, who represented the citizens. Caesar immediately assumed leadership of the latter. Caesar fully understood the evils of usury and how to counter them. He recognized the profound truth that money is a national agent, created by law for a national purpose, and that no classes of men should withhold it from circulation so as
What? He recognized the profound truth that money is a national agent created by law. Money is created by law. And no classes of men should withhold it from circulation.
to cause panics in order that speculators could advance the rates of interest or could buy up property at ruinous prices after such panic. Caesar introduced the following social reforms. 1. Restoration of property was done at the much lower valuations which held prior to the Civil War, 49 to 45 BC. 2. Several remissions of rents were granted. 3. Large numbers of poor citizens and discharged veterans were settled on allotments. 4. Free housing was provided to 80,000 impoverished families. 5. Soldiers' pay was increased from 123 to 225 denarii. 6. The corn dole was regulated. 7. Provincial communities were enfranchised. 8. Confusion in the calendar was removed by fixing it at 365 and 1/4 days from 1st of January 44 BC. His monetary reforms were as follows. 1. State debt levels were immediately reduced by 25%. 2. Control of the mint was transferred from the patricians, usurers, to government. 3. Cheap metal coins were issued as the means of exchange.
So sorry for the interruptions, but I just wanted to kind of explain, you know, if you're watching this and comparing it to what's happening like today. So we believe, or we are stupid enough to think that, you know, our presidents and our representatives would be like a Caesar, you know? And that's, I'm pretty sure that's why Trump is in office today, is because a lot of really not understanding people thought that he was going to fix it like Caesar did. And Caesar did fix it. And as we are about to see, a lot of people got mad. And that's why we can see today that not a lot of people are getting, well, you know, not those kind of people are getting mad because they run it. They run our president.
4. It was ruled that interest could not be levied at more than 1% per month. 5. It was decreed that interest could not be charged on interest and that the total interest charge could never exceed the capital loaned, the indublim rule. 6. Slavery was abolished as a means of settling debt. 7. Aristocrats were forced to employ their capital and not hoard it. These measures enraged the aristocrats and plutocrats whose livelihood was now severely restricted. They therefore conspired to murder Caesar, the hero of the people. On that fateful morning of the 15th
their go-to. That is their go-to. Kind of like JFK.
March 44 BC, only 4 years after assuming power, he arrived at the Senate building unarmed, having dismissed his military guard, who had previously been in constant attendance. Surrounded by 60 conspirators, he was stabbed to death and received 23 wounds. The Gold Age, 27 BC to 476 AD. In 27 BC, shortly after Caesar's death and his deification, the Romans adopted the gold standard, which would have far-reaching implications for the financial stability of the empire and lead directly to its demise. Previously, during the days of the Roman Republic, gold coins were issued only in times of great need, such as during the Second Punic War or the campaign of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. There were very few gold mines in Europe, except in remote places like Wales, Transylvania, and Spain, and therefore most of the supplies could only be secured from the east. This in turn required a large and expensive army, which became engaged in constant conflict at the empire's fringes. The gold coin was known as an Arius. Also in circulation were the silver denarius and the copper coins, the sestertius, dupondius, and the as. The scarcity of gold or commodity money frequently induced periods of deflation as a result of the lack of a circulating means of exchange. In 13 BC, a measure of relief was provided when the weight of the gold aureus was reduced from 122 to 72 grains, and this remained the standard weight until 310 AD. However, metals continued to flow eastwards in order to pay for luxury items, religious dues, and usury payments. Furthermore, wear and tear resulted in the loss of 1/3 of total coinage in circulation over a 100-year period. As gold was treated as a commodity, its debasement was not tolerated. Emperor Constantine, 275 to 337 AD, personally ordered death for counterfeiting and the burning of public minters who committed falsification. Money changers who did not report a counterfeit gold bezant, solidus, were immediately flogged, enslaved, and exiled. These regulations were effective for the bezant, which weighed 70 grains and was slightly more than the bezant which was still circulating in 1025 AD and weighed 68 grains. In 313 AD, Christianity was tolerated by the Edict of Milan, and from 380 AD was established as the official religion by Emperor Theodosius I from 347 to 395 AD. From this time, monetary power resided in the religious authority of the Pontifex Maximus. A feature of the imperial era was social injustice and the undermining of the middle classes through excessive taxation.
Oh.
The Roman businessman was not a trader, but a looter of the provinces, as the homeland had a weak industrial production base, which was incapable of providing the required manufactured goods. As the monetarization of society continued, with the rich parasitizing the common man, the plebeians became more like slaves. The abolition of the jury system was symptomatic of the declining respect and importance for the common man in Rome.
The what of the jury system? The abolition of the jury system was symptomatic of the declining respect and importance for the common man in Roman society. What can we not have here in America anymore? Jury nullification? There's no jury system here in America either. What do they call them? Grand juries? They don't ask random people off the street to come to be in the grand jury. Those are lawyers and judges. It's disgusting.
Roman society. Role of the church in the decline and fall. The tax that Emperor Constantine decreed, viz., that 1/10 of all income had to be tithed to the Christian church, hastens the destruction of the empire. Eventually, the church held 1/3 to 1/2 of all lands and accumulated wealth. This concentration of wealth produced a great scarcity of coinage. Money existed, but there was no circulation or distribution of goods and services. Instead of recycling the tithed money by means of investment in the community or charitable works such as construction of hospitals, schools, and libraries, vast hoards of gold were concentrated behind the 20-foot, 6.1 meter, thick walls of the fortress city of Constantinople and the Vatican fortress in Rome. In its last years in the 5th and 6th centuries, the Roman Empire had become a parasitic organism, subject to alternating phases of inflation and deflation. Its economic ruination preceded its political ruination. There was no industrial production, almost all food had to be imported, and usury was practiced on an unprecedented scale. The wealth of the empire
That's literally where we are right now, today.
that was not held by the church was controlled by 2,000 Roman families. The rest of the population lived in poverty. Consequences. The implosion of the western half of the empire in 476 AD, after repeated military incursions by the Goths and Vandals, resulted in the Dark Ages. A punishing multi-century deflationary depression followed. According to the United States Silver Commission of 1876, the metallic money of the Roman Empire at its height amounted to $1.8 billion, but by the end of the Dark Ages, it had shrunk to $200 million. Agriculture was reduced to subsistence level. Large sailing vessels vanished as there was no trade. Commerce stagnated. Arts and sciences were lost, and the knowledge of cement making disappeared. Major factors in the decline of the Roman Empire were the concentration of wealth, the absence of mining deposits for industrial production, and the vast importation of non-white slaves with the resultant degradation of the genetic value of the nation. By the 4th century AD, as a result of the continuing decline in Roman female fertility, slaves outnumbered citizens by 5 to 1. The most important economic reason was an inadequate supply of an inexpensive circulating medium of money and the false notion that money should be a commodity. Thus, from an economic perspective, the lessons from the fall of Rome are that a dishonest economic system will inevitably contribute to the forces of dissolution. No society can survive a false economic system. For any society to function and prosper, it is absolutely fundamental that the means of exchange be issued free of debt and interest by the legal authority of the state as representatives of the people in perpetuity.
Crazy, huh? And this one was interesting. I just remember through many of my studies, I came across a thing called the Clearfield Doctrine. Let me see. I just thought it was interesting because, of course, the law will completely fuck this up because, I found this. And if you look anywhere and I'll show you in a minute, in any kind of legal stuff, And this is what I mean about lawyers who get taught the law. You know, they don't actually get taught the law. They get taught their little cute clubs rules, and they all keep them for each other so that it is what it is. Let me see and make sure you guys can see this. Yes, you can. Okay. So, like right here, it says, the Clearfield Doctrine as set forth in Clearfield Trust Company versus United States. I believe this, when was this? In like 19, let me see exactly when this was. Because of course, you know, I have a Penn State lawyer talking about it, but it shows this was in 1957. This was written. The Clearfield Doctrine was in, I believe, 1942. Pretty sure. Anyways, I apologize. 1942. The Clearfield Doctrine, and it states in that opinion that governments descend to the level of mere private corporation and take on the characteristics of a mere private citizen, where private corporate commercial paper, i.e. Federal Reserve notes, and securities, i.e. checks, etc., is concerned, for purposes of suit. And this is the law. For purposes of suit. Such corporations and individuals are regarded as entities entirely separate from government. And that was the Bank of the United States versus Planters Bank. And all of these. And then it says, the real party in interest is not the de jure United States of America or state, but the bank and the fund. So, just like that guy was saying, who owns the United States? The banks owe the United States. Governments lose their immunity and descend to the level of private corporations when involved in commercial activity enforcing negotiable instruments, as in fines, penalties, assessments, bails, taxes. The remedy lies in the hand of the state and its municipality seeking remedy. Governments are corporations, and private corporations and their officers are not immune from civil damages. So this is, you know how we can't ever sue the government because the government can only agree for you to sue them? It's like cops, you know, this is why I always try to tell the auditors, it's no use in messing with the cops because that's like throwing pumpkins across the moat towards the king. You know, you're just sitting there and they're looking at you and laughing at you because you're throwing pumpkins and food and vegetables over at the king because you're mad. What's that going to do? What's that going to do? That's like what auditors are doing with cops. And they only get themselves in trouble. What does it say here? The principles of estoppel apply against the state as well as individuals. Clearfield Doctrine proves when governments descend to the corporate level, they cease to be governmental entities. But of course, public office means any position in which the normal and usual duties are conducted on behalf of a governmental entity. But look, nowhere will you find that anywhere in any of, you know, like watch. This was a nice little cute little video. Let me see. I just wanted to see what they would say in this video, and I thought it was hysterical because this is exactly what you'll find in like legal classes and stuff like that about the Clearfield Doctrine.
In Clearfield Trust Company versus United States, a forged check led to an important pronouncement about the authority of federal courts to create federal common law. In April of 1936, the United States issued a check to Claire Barner for services he'd provided to the Works Progress Administration. The check was mailed to Barner's address, but someone intercepted it. The thief took the check to a JCPenney store in Clearfield, Pennsylvania, where he pretended to be Barner and endorsed the check to the store in exchange for cash and merchandise. JCPenney endorsed the check to the Clearfield Trust Company, which endorsed the check to the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Pursuant to U.S. Treasury regulations, Clearfield guaranteed all prior endorsements on the check. Clearfield then collected the money from the Federal Reserve Bank and paid the amount of the check to JCPenney. In early May, Barner told his supervisor that he hadn't received the check. Barner eventually signed an affidavit alleging that the endorsement of his name on the cashed check was a forgery. The United States didn't give Clearfield or JCPenney notice of the forgery until January of 1937. In August of that year, the United States notified Clearfield for the first time that it was asking for reimbursement of the money. In November of 1939, the United States brought an action against Clearfield in federal district court, seeking to recover the lost funds based on Clearfield's guarantee of prior endorsements. The district court held that Pennsylvania law applied to the action and concluded that the United States was barred from recovery because it had unreasonably delayed in giving Clearfield notice of the forgery. As a result, the district court dismissed the action. The Third Circuit reversed, holding that federal law governed the action, and under federal law, the United States wasn't barred from recovery because Clearfield hadn't been injured by the delayed notice. The United States Supreme Court granted certiorari.
And that was it. That was it. Did that tell you anything? No, that didn't tell you anything, because that was nothing. Because I just read to you the opinions from the court out of the Clearfield Doctrine, and did it mention that anywhere in that video? And then at the end, it was just like, and then the Supreme Court issued certiorari, which means it went back down so that they could rule over it again, a review. And the same thing here goes by this guy from Pennsylvania Law School in 1957, because he actually, where did it say? Because he actually represented somebody. Where did he say? And this is what's so crappy about the law. The law is supposed to be available to everybody, and they just make it so retarded. Is it or not? Yeah, see, and this is, let me just, you can still glean things out of here. So it says, the familiar and judicially recognized practice whereby unsuccessful litigants and lawyers give vent to their disappointment in tavern or press includes within its scope the more sedate and less bibulous type of discussion which appears in law reviews. It may be useful to indulge in such comment on a recent decision of the United States Supreme Court which may clarify or further confuse, of course, the distinction between the spheres of federal and state law under Erie Doctrine. So the lawyers will take the Clearfield Doctrine and they'll talk about how it's a fight between federal and state laws. Nowhere does it talk about them being a corporation or private corporation, because they're using Federal Reserve notes, which is a private corporation. It's not a government. But where did it take? Let me just see here real quick, because it talked about, I don't know if you guys know anything about the Erie Railroad. That's when they changed the law. That's when they incorporated the law into statutes and codes and regulations, which was messed up, which also kind of related back to that video we just watched from the Roman Empire thing, where it talked about how the United States got all of the land. Oh, no, that was that guys. That was the financial guys. Yeah, he was talking about how the United States took all that land for the railroads. Yep. Let me see. But it talks about how this Clearfield Doctrine or whatever, yeah, the prior law, the holding in Erie, as is well known, was that when exercising its diversity jurisdiction, a federal court must apply state decisional law as well as state statutory law. Huh? This decision from the pen of Mr. Justice Brandeis, yep, he was the one that took over. This guy right here was the one that took over the judicial system. We don't have three separate things of government. Overruled a long-standing precedent to the contrary. This decision from the pen of Mr. Justice Brandeis overruled a long-standing precedent to the contrary, in which Mr. Justice Story had spoken for the court in 1842. 1842. The Erie opinion relied upon historical research by Charles Warren and undertook to eliminate the anomalous result long criticized by Mr. Justice Holmes and others, whereby a suit on the same facts might lead to a different outcome if heard in a federal court instead of a state court sitting across the street. Under the Erie rule, of federal court in a diversity case is simply one of the courts of the state in which it sits. And when it applies the common law of the state, it must derive such law from the applicable state decisions and not from its own rationations. From their own rations. The course pursued by federal courts, therefore, was condemned as unconstitutional usurpation of authority. Did that matter? Did that matter? No. The Rules of Decision Act was construed in accordance with Charles Warren's conclusions, and Swift versus Tyson was added to the long list of discarded precedents. See? So it didn't matter because some other dude concluded that it didn't matter. And this plus a whole bunch of other legal precedent was added to the long list of discarded precedents. Later refinements of the Erie Rule made it clear that the state law to be applied included state rules on conflicts of laws. Oh, God. So nowhere in here does it talk about what we just talked about. Is a familiar doctrine that the prohibition of a federal statute may not be set at naught or benefits denied by the state statutes or state common law rules. In such a case, our decision is not controlled by Erie versus Tompkins, but the doctrine of the case is inapplicable to those areas of judicial decision with which the policy of law is so dominated by sweep of federal statutes that the legal relations. Yeah, see. When federal statutes condemns an act as unlawful, the extent of the nature of the legal consequences of the condemnation thought left by the statute to judicial determination are nevertheless federal questions. See, so it talks about federal conflicting with state. So state law and policy must yield to federal statute. I'm sorry, doesn't the Constitution say that any law abhorrent to the Constitution is null and void, falling to the state and or the people? You see, guys, you have to understand how they took over. And this is why I talk about, oh man. I just sat there the whole time and didn't even share this tab. So messed up. Yeah, see, so the federal statute conflicts with the state law. And so in this opinion, they're saying that state law has to yield to federal statute and policy. So that's why they found it unconstitutional up here. Because I just show you guys. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't switch over. They found it unconstitutional because of that. I just thought that was so ridiculous. Let me show this one right here. When governments enter the world of commerce, they are subject to the same burdens as any private firm or corporation. And this is also why I don't like our law of today. And that's the difference. Like, people don't understand what I'm talking about. I'm not against law. I'm not against government. I'm not against any of that. I'm against bad law, bad government. And that's what we have today. We have bad law. We have bad government. So the Clearfield Trust Company versus United States, 1942 case. Yep, I knew it. And therefore important to patriotic Americans because it is a public policy decision following after the changes in the legal system in 1938. See? They changed the legal system in 1938 by the Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case, where earlier decisions of the Supreme Court based upon public law are not honored in court of legislative nature, created to administer the bankruptcy of the nation on behalf of the corporate government's creditors. Oh man, I really need to start getting a little bit more organized so that I can show you guys these things quickly and not be so boring and crappy, because I saw some lawyer on YouTube making fun of people talking about the bankruptcy of America. And he's like, there's no bankruptcy, blah, 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 blah. And this is what I mean about lawyers. There's no bankruptcy. I don't know what you talk about, blah, blah, blah. America has been bankrupt several times. And right now is another one of those times. And that's why we see what we're seeing, and why they're trying to change into cryptocurrency and central digital banking, even though what Trump said, there's not going to be central digital banking. There's going to be some other digital thing that he creates. We have the corporate government's creditors. The use of private commercial paper, debt currency, or Federal Reserve notes removes the sovereignty status of governments of we the people and reduces them to an entity rather than a government. And like any corporation or person, an entity cannot compel performance on its corporate statutes or corporation rules unless it, like any other corporation, rules like any other corporation, is the holder in due course of some contract or commercial agreement between it and the one whom demands for performances are made and is willing to produce said document and to enter same into evidence before trying to enforce its statutes. Yeah, this is also why I audit the administration, because it doesn't matter if it's law, if it's school, if it's doctors, it doesn't matter. Everything is called an administer to you, right? Well, I can administer to myself. And this is the problem that we have here in America and probably everywhere. You know, they have literally incorporated everything. So you can't find good doctors because they're all incorporated via a license. They can't communicate with each other. So like when you go to a hospital or something, there's like an anesthesiologist and a optometrist and blah, 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 these stupid ass words, right? And they only are specified in a small portion of medicine. So if you're sitting there like on a hospital bed and, you know, some anesthesiologist is like putting you under or something and something bad goes wrong, they can't do anything because they don't know. Not only do they not know, but they can't by law, right? Even if you were a doctor and you were certified in several different things, if you were on call in a certain capacity, you couldn't act in any other capacity without breaking the law. So they would rather you die or be additionally harmed because they're not willing to act in a different capacity to save your life due to the law. And this is what I'm trying to say about our whole entire America. You know what I mean? Like lawyers and doctors and teachers, and it doesn't matter. You name it, they're controlled by the state, and that's why we don't have anything good anymore. That's why we can't trust each other. That's why we can't trust the government. You know, if we were all just like back in the day, you know, there was a doctor. They were skilled in medicine and such. You could call them up and they could come to you and do the things without issue, without control by the government. And God forbid, if something happened, you still had the courts to find remedy. And guess what? You could go by yourself. You didn't have to chop off an arm or a leg to give to an attorney to misrepresent you. So let's see. I don't know what this is. You're calling my attention. Oh, this was a letter. You're calling my attention to the exceedingly broad definition of the term person. In our latest issue of Black's appreciated, because with that awareness, we now realize we need to pin our wolf adversary down in every legal situation as to his precise meaning whenever he uses that term or reads that term in some statute that he asserts is directed to include us in its demands or its limitations upon our freedom. We will all be presumed to be U.S. citizens, one, by the bureaucrats employed in the administration of our corporate nation's bankruptcy, unless we might remain outside of the pledge made by the administrators of the respective state governments acting in the corporate capacity, wherein they, without power of attorney from anyone, pledge the life, labor, and property of their citizenry as surety for the debt obligations of the legislative democracy created by Article 1 section, not there, clause 17 of our national constitution, without offering the alert citizenry of remedy from the consequences of the administrative presumption, administration, administrative law. This is what I'm trying to talk about. That the citizenry would be behind the state administrators in the above pledge. Those administrators could be charged with fraud. So to cover their back end from such charges from the handful of alert sui juris pro se litigants, sovereigns, who might object to having their life, labor, and property pledged as surety for an equitable debt obligation in private commercial paper, which Congress could borrow in the name of the United States, which that entity created by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 calls itself as distinct from the Union of States, now referred to as America, and the citizenry thereof as American, rather than as United States citizen. The state administrators offered a remedy, which is now in code from an accepted code form and accepted by all state governments acting in their corporate capacity to those who wish to exercise it. That remedy is the Uniform Commercial Code in Article 1, Section 207, and to those exercising said remedy, Article 1, Section 103.6 guarantees their former sui juris status under the common law, even though they are forced to make private commercial debt paper the medium of exchange for each of a lawful medium in substance of gold or silver. That's another thing that the lawyers talk about in the Clearfield Doctrine. They talk about how they take state common law and they convert it into federal common law, which is, statutes and blah, 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 blah. I can't remember. Oh, yeah, I got to. There is this. I was just thinking about this too. I don't know why I was thinking about this, but the other day I was thinking, and I was just like, because you can't pay a lawyer straight up, so lawyers have trusts. It's like when you get a lawyer and they're representing you and they charge you fucking billions of dollars for nothing. When you pay them, it goes into a trust account, and I was just like, why? Why can't you just pay somebody for their services? And that kind of came to my mind. I was just like, oh, because they're all agents of the state, so they work for the state. So the state has to pay them. And I mean, like, where did I just see that? Talking about the state. I believe this was in here. State. Sorry, hold on. I just saw this thing. It talked about what a state was. Anyhow. There's I'm trying to find this. Let me see real quick. Hold on, I gotta log in real quick. Give me a second. There we go. I just wanted to show you guys this now too, because in the archive, they don't let you like get things anymore at all, ever. So that's like why I couldn't really finish the, no, I can because I downloaded it, but it's on a different computer. The Federal Reserve and all that, because they took those away. Let me see here. I thought this was interesting. Of course, it's old. The Fraternity, Lawyers and Judges, Inclusion by John Fitzgerald Millay. Paragon House, St. Paul, Minnesota. First edition, 2004. Copyright, 2004. So it's actually 1917. The Fraternity, Lawyers and Judges in Collusion. 1917. 1917. It's also interesting for James Freeman. He's in Arizona. I used to live in Arizona. I don't know if I can toggle for full screen unless it's going to mess everything up. Let me see if you guys can even see this. Okay, it said it lost you guys. So let me see. It said it lost you guys. Oh, I think you guys can see. Very interesting. Politics competes with trial practice. Yep, see? Two diverse judicial systems in America. Two diverse judicial systems. Remember when we saw over here? Get out of here. Let me show you. Remember over here when I was showing you guys and it said was that when exercising its diversity jurisdiction. Okay? That's what it's talking about. That's the diverse trial bench serving as umpire, appellate judge, the lawmaker, from judge to lawyer, maturing a law firm, the golden years, sunset, twilight, a few suggestions for the future. The fraternity selects our president. I told y'all. I mean, it's just really interesting. I don't know if anybody wants to. Let me see how long we've been on real quick. I'm not sure how many people would be interested in this. 1 hour. Yeah. Exactly. And that's what. Let me see if this messes anything up. No. See if it makes it better on y'all side. Yeah. Opening of the scripture. I commenced this confessional diatribe in March of 1991. Oh, 1991. So I guess he was born in 1917? Not sure. At this time, I am at the head of a successful law firm of 41 lawyers located in Tucson, Arizona. At 74 years of age, yep, I'm somewhat over the hill at my specialty, trial law. I also wanted to let you guys know, like, I used to work at a corporate law firm, and all of the attorneys in there didn't do shit. I mean, they did bullshit, but there was only 1 or 2 trial lawyers, meaning lawyers that would actually go and try a case. My law firm had been growing steadily for over 2 decades since September 1969, when I resigned as an appellate court judge to go back to my old law firm. When I came back after 12 years of serving as a trial and then appellate judge, it was to practice law in a firm consisting of 5, counting myself, partners, and 1 associate, a newly admitted lawyer, in the very same offices where I had practiced a dozen years before. And from that, over the next 2 decades, there developed a firm of 41 lawyers, plus a staff of some 50 secretaries, paralegals, and receptionists. Yep, See how they conflate the legal field and why people fight so much to keep it the way that it is, because all these people who literally charge ridiculous amounts of money for nothing. That's why. And from that, over the next 2 decades, they developed a firm. Oh, yeah. And then that which was created disintegrated. The changes in our culture that caused this rise and this fall is the story told here. To understand what happened, we must look at the practice of law as it existed in the small town of Yuma, Arizona, where my father had been a lawyer before me. In my childhood years, Yuma County, one of Arizona's 14 vast counties, had just one judge, a Judge Kelly, who stood 6 feet 3 inches in physical height and miles above that in regard that the community had for him. And see, this is the difference. This is also what's important about our legal world. You know, we can't trust anybody in our government anymore, including the judicial system. And that's wrong. This is what I'm trying to talk about with doctors and lawyers and all these people. Like, we need to be able to trust them as a person, not as a conglomerate. And they don't care nowadays because they've incorporated everything. So you can't hold anybody accountable. The only people that can be held accountable is us weenie people. And attorneys were supposed to be, this is literally why I always reiterate the 13th Amendment that everybody scoffs at. Because the whole point and purpose of law was for us, we the people, the government. Okay? It wasn't supposed to be how it was in the royal world. Okay? Because all of the lawyers, those were the king's lawyers. They were lawyers for the government. And that's where we find ourselves again today. Every lawyer out there is for the government. They work for the government. They are agents of the crown, whether they like to believe it or not. Okay? And so imagine that. All of the lawyers out there, all of them, you have to be a bar attorney to practice law. The bar is, I mean, it's a private thing, but it's a corporation. I mean, it's so sick. It's so sick because it's not a part of the government, but yet it rules the government. It runs the government. Not one thing can be had, like that video we watched the other day, without a lawyer, a government lawyer, saying what is. Okay, so imagine that. So just like I watched a deposition the other day with Pigs Under Pressure, and that was a cop being paid by tax dollars and an attorney being paid by tax dollars, and the attorney is protecting the cop against the taxpayer. So we, the taxpayer, are paying both of those individuals to fuck us in the asshole, and they want us to like it. Okay, Epstein, BS? No. We all knew that Judge Kelly was different from the rest of us. He was the conscience of the community. He was there looking out for our interest and meeting our punishment and meting out punishment in a fatherly but stern way to those who transgressed. And this is what we mean. We need to know that this person is an ethical, trustworthy individual, not a disgusting, decrepit money whore. He was not a mere lawyer. He was a different breed entirely. If he were to have been defeated in any of the elections at which he was reelected every 4 years, always without opposition, we could not imagine his lowering himself to be a lawyer. Oh, you mean they actually elected lawyers and judges back in the day? They didn't just put him on the bench and call him a judge. Judge Kelly knew our community and most of those living in it, and most of those living in it knew Judge Kelly and respected him for his office and his decisions. I had never, in all of my growing up, expressed a desire to be a judge. Even to myself, I was always going to be a lawyer, like my daddy. But after a dozen years of law practice, when I was offered the appointment by Arizona's Governor McFarland, in whose election I had coincidentally served as his campaign manager, I realized that deep down I would not like to be a judge, Kelly. 12 years later, after 7 years as a trial judge and 5 more as an appellate judge, I know I could never be a Judge Kelly. For one thing, my height of 5'10" and 1/2 inches, when I stand very erect and place the bump on the top of my head immediately under the measuring stick, is not sufficiently awe-inspiring to carry out the role. But even more so, there didn't seem to be much of an opportunity to better things for all of us, as Judge Kelly had done. Instead of molding the morals of the community as Judge Kelly had done, I found myself in the role of a referee in the endless series of ball games in which lawyers were the players. Yep, that's exactly what it is. When I behaved as a good referee and called the balls and strikes according to the intricate rules established by lawyers for their games, I was praised by all my fellow lawyers. When I stepped out of this role and attempted to stem the tide of lawsuits that kept augmenting by the year, I was coolly greeted by my fellow judge lawyers. And after I became an appellate judge, I sometimes found myself left with futile, dissenting opinions. When I tired of judging, see, this is what I'm trying to say. The cops, right? The cops all work for each other. The lawyers all work for each other. The judges all work for each other. When I tired of judging and came back to my old firm, it was to a different spirited group than that which I left. Yep. Judge Hall, who had been the Judge Kelly of our county and the founder of that firm, had died the prior year, and with him had gone qualities that had dignified our profession. We had been a proudly professional group that knew that our compensation had to come in good part, not in dollars, because we, as lawyers, accepted the dismal fact that we could not compete in that regard with other more lucrative callings, but rather from enjoying the role of being a trusted advisor, savior to our clients. Making money was a goal, yes, but not the decision maker of whether to take on each and every case. This is also what makes me sick to my stomach, because, you know, all these dumbasses who are lawyers on YouTube and everywhere else, they're just like, oh no, the law. And I'm just like, what about the law? The law is bullshit. Because you guys will sit there and you'll talk about the Diddy's and the OJs and all the people who can afford to flash and plash all their stuff around. But what about the little guy? What about the Pigs Under Pressure, or the James Freeman, or the Eric Mata, or the CJ Grishams, or the thousands and billions of us? I mean, CJ Grisham himself was a lawyer. You know? What about us? I mean, I see there, Andre Shouldn't Drink. That's not his channel name anymore. Andre Investigates. There you go. Andre Investigates. He has awesome investigations, and almost every single one of those investigations that are just jaw-dropping, every single time he has somebody on there is like, oh yeah, if anybody could help me find a lawyer, I can't find a lawyer. If anybody could help me if any lawyers are watching this, nah, bitch, don't fucking ever. Lawyers fucking suck dick. Literal. Excuse my language, but literal. Okay, this is what I'm trying to say, because you never find anybody with buku money having problems with finding a lawyer and getting representation. But every single individual, all of us plebes down here, right, they can't get a lawyer. And then if they try to represent themselves, like Lane Myers, you know, they get made fun of or they get railroaded. I'm not too sure about Lane Myers myself. Now, watching all this, I'm not too sure. Because no way would you take a plea bargain or probation. I mean, I really think if two things could have been happening there. Because he said his wife made him take a plea. Again, with that whole wife situation. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to go off. When I was first promoted to partner in the Judge Hall firm in 1947, we did not charge by the hour. Charging by the hours for plumbers, we had said proudly, but we are professionals, and we actually told potential recruits to our firm, you'll never get rich practicing law. Yeah. Again, I used to work for a very big corporate state law firm, and let me tell you, they didn't just charge by the hour, they charged by the fucking second, bro. By the second. And they got bukus of dollars. Every single breath that was taken was charged. So disgusting. And my earnings as a newly admitted lawyer were comparable to what teachers and skilled craftsmen earned. Pfft, are you kidding me? Are you effing kidding me? Of course, we did not hold ourselves out as doing free work, but we did adjust our fees to the pocketbooks of our clients. These adjustments would happen when we met, the three of us, almost every morning in Judge Hall's office. Judge, because our senior partner had served 10 years as a trial judge, and very importantly, we sensed that the use of the title pleased him, and more important, perhaps, brought in clients. At these morning conferences, if it was time to bill for work done, there would be discussion as to what the dollar amount should be. Time to bill was almost always when we had finished with a particular job. Then we would discuss what it was worth in terms of 1, what we had achieved for the client, 2, what the client was able to pay, and 3, what the client expected to pay. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like I said, I used to create the bills. Every single second is charged. And not only that, I worked for a corporate state law firm that dealt with exactly what we were just reading in the Clearfield Doctrine, talking about the Erie Railroad, because somebody was hurt on the job. Now we have specific legal fields. Again, like what I was talking about with doctors, you can't touch any other portion of the law. You have to be a specialist there. So you can't say anything about anything else, just that, right? But this huge corporate state law firm that dealt with Texas workers' compensation, i.e. people getting damaged, hurt on the job, many of them dead. Okay, it was disgusting work these people did. It was disgusting work these people did. And they had to deal with doctors, right? And so they would have to send their client, the person who was injured on the job. Well, we worked against the clients. So again, like I said, we were the state law firm that worked against the clients, the people seeking remedy for their harms on the job. We worked against them. And this is what I'm trying to say about how disgusting the law is. And because I wanted to be a lawyer, I was on the path to be going to law school and all that. But no. Through all my researches and studies and experience in the law, it is nothing what you think it is. And while I was there, we worked with doctors, and we had specific doctors. This is how disgusting these people are. We had doctors that we liked, and I'm pretty sure they paid them off. So there was doctors that we liked, that we preferred the client to go see because they would find in our case, right? They would always find in our case. And then there would be other doctors, because again, this is the law. So of course we say one thing and it goes back to their lawyer has to say another thing, and then they blah, 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 blah. It's total bullshit. So then we would tell them to go to this doctor, our doctor. Our doctor would say, oh no, they're fine. They can go back to work. They're not hurt. Everything's fine. And then of course their attorneys would be like, no, they fucking lost an arm. Okay. So how about they go see our doctors to see what they say. Right. And so it was always back and forth. And I would see these files. I was a paralegal to like fucking 15 attorneys. I was also a department manager of like 5 departments. And I would see all this stuff. And I only know what I know because I'm so nosy. Right. Nobody talks about anything. Zip lip in these places because they're all doing nasty, disgusting things all the time. Right. So, and in one of these briefings, I had a team of briefers, right? Little kids from UT, the University of Texas, because this I didn't go to UT, but I was told the day I was hired that they only hire students from University of Texas, talking about an equal employment opportunity, right? Equal employment, right? Yeah, guys, get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. Nothing is equal. The law is totally BS. But I happened to get the job because I managed a restaurant, or it was a restaurant I managed. But the owner of that restaurant owned a catering company, a wedding catering company. And the office manager who hired me happened to have that company cater her wedding. So she was all like, I'll hire you because of that. But usually I only hired UT students. And I was like, okay. But anyway, so these kids who would come and brief the files, we would get these files, and one of them took out a piece of paper that a doctor, the other side's doctor, not our doctors, but another doctor from the other, people's firm, and they would send in paperwork. And one time, or often, but one time it was really funny because we pasted it up. I think I have a picture. I might be able to find a picture and show you guys, but we pasted it up on the wall because a doctor sent in their file for briefing gigantic letters on one piece of paper. It says, follow the law. That's all it said. In type, gigantic on one piece of paper. On one piece of paper, it filled the whole entire page. It said, follow the law. And we were a law firm, a gigantic corporate law firm. And no, we didn't follow the law. The law is not followed to any degree, anywhere, ever. And that's what the doctor was trying to say, like, follow the law, quit fucking around. You know, this guy has lost his arm. He cannot work. Follow the law. It doesn't matter. We always won because we were the state. It's disgusting. It's truly disgusting. At these morning conferences, oh yeah, all of the above, as we will get to in good time, is a far cry from what occurs in the law offices of this country today. Yep, I just told y'all a little bit. Even before I had gone to the bench, sorry guys, again, pause, sorry. Another thing that really pissed me off and made me not continue to go in, like, to the legal field or whatever, was the money it takes to even become a lawyer. You know what I'm saying? Or even to become a law student. You know, I I already had my LSAC, you know, which is the law school fucking bullshit. You know, there's so many hoops that you have to jump over just to get into law. And that's why they think it's so great and grand and so wonderful. And oh. No, it's to keep people out. And it's to whatever. Anyways, thousands of dollars. You have to pay thousands of dollars just to apply to law school. To apply to law school, you have to pay thousands of dollars. Take tests, test and more tests, and then you can go to law school. And then after law school, you take more tests, and then maybe you can practice law. It's all disgusting. It's to keep people out. And I used to watch a woman, she's now passed away. I used to be a caregiver to an old lady who had Parkinson's and dystonia. And she was wealthy. You know, her husband was, you know, a dean at the university near us. And well, I would always, you know, I was her caretaker. So we would always go out and eat with all of her friends and stuff. And her friends were all these uppity, tuppity people. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of gross too, because I remember meeting this chick who was like really young, probably younger than I am. I mean, I look young as shit, but I'm old as shit. And this chick I met at one of these little things was, I don't even know how old, but she was like totally like, you know, pink hair, piercings everywhere, you know, like dressed interestingly. And then I found out that she was a professor at the University of Texas for feminine studies. And I was like, of course. You know, it's just so gross how the world works, man. But I met another woman through this. She was an elderly woman, and she was actually this lady's neighbor. So I talked to her a lot. But when they found out that I was interested in law school, she started talking to me about it. And we were at this table with a whole bunch of people eating at a restaurant. And she was just like, oh, you're interested in law? And I was just like, yeah. And she was like, what kind of law? And I was just like, I'm not sure yet. And she was just like, oh, yeah, well, when I went to UT, and then, of course, she went off and she was talking about her life or whatever, how old people always do, which I don't mind. But, you know, she was just like, yeah, well, when I went to UT, I went for, I can't remember what she said she was going for, like English or something. I don't even know what she said she originally went to the school for, but she said that she had a boyfriend and he was going to the law school. And she said that her boyfriend's friends had like made a joke or something and said that like women or she or something couldn't be a lawyer or something. I don't know. I can't remember. It was many years ago, but I just remember this. And she said that that pissed her off. So she changed her studies from like English or something to law. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting. And she was just like, yeah. And, you know, after I paid $1,500 and got my law degree, I was just like, oh, you mean $15,000? Because of course, she's old as shit. So, you know, the price of tea in China changes, right? Just like today. So I was just thinking, you know, because it sure as hell doesn't cost $15,000 to go to law school today. No. It costs like $300,000 to go to law school today. And she was just like, yeah, $1,500 I paid, and then I got my law degree. And I was just like, oh, and I literally corrected her in front of a table full of people. And I was just like, oh, you mean $15,000? Again, already just assuming that, you know, in those years, how much it costs. And she was like, no. And like, she stopped me and she's like, no. $1,500. And I was like, what? And I literally like screamed, what? Because $1,500 isn't even going to get you in to the LSAC. You know what I'm saying? And this is what I mean. And that's what pisses me off, because this woman, granted, she's old as shit, but she went to law school, learned the same law that I would be learning today, and she paid $1,500 to get her Juris Doctorate. Whereas today they would want me to pay $300,000. You know, to go to UT Law School today, it's like per semester or per semester, and you have to pay per semester, and it's like what, $40,000 plus per semester, and how many semesters you got to go? That's way beyond $1,500. And I'm the type of person, I grew up homeless on the streets as a child with my siblings, and I do not think that it is okay to charge for education. I don't think it's okay to charge for knowledge. So in every endeavor I've ever had, I try to make it as free as possible for my own education. I hold a master's degree and little debt. Sorry. Okay, so even before I had gone on the bench in 1957, billing by the hour had started to infiltrate the profession, and upon returning to practice 12 years later, I found that the metamorphosis had accelerated during my time of playing judge. My return to firm startled me, and I must confess, pleasantly so, with its focus on money-making. See, of course, if he confesses, I mean, who doesn't want to make money, right? I was soon exposed to discussions among our lawyers that proclaimed that fees were now of the essence. Representing a client and not being fully paid at the augmented rates was something of a black mark for any of us who permitted this to happen. Charges to the client now started out as mathematical multiple by the hour. See, and this is also what, for any of us, so this is what I'm trying to talk about. The law isn't the law. The law is just agreed upon by them. So before they didn't charge like that, but because they decided they wanted to, and because all of them agreed that they wanted to, now it became a thing. Which really meant by every 6 minutes. Yeah, see? When did he do this? 1957? Can't remember, but like I said, we charged by the second. By every breath that someone took, we charged. And it was a lot of money. It was just gross, because every hour was divided up into tenths for entry on our timesheets. Yep. These recordings were multiplied by some ordained dollar figure, which dollar figure far surpassed the hourly rate of the most organized of plumbers. Yep, see? Special matters, by reason of the amount of property involved or the intricacy of the legal issues, received a special billing appropriately increased. So I became the president of this money-making entity. My partners became my fellow shareholders. I wish that I could say that I was appalled at these changes, but to the contrary, I was intrigued with this new approach to my father's profession. I sensed with enthusiasm that it would be more lucrative, and it was. Oh, yes, it was. For my new regular clients, inherited from the member of this same firm who had been appointed as a trial judge at the same time that I had resigned, I accepted billing by the minute as the way of life. Yep, see? By this time, 1969, all top-rated lawyers were doing the same thing, and judges had come to endorse this time is money concept to the point of even requiring time records when the matter of fees was to be determined in a court hearing, something none of the trial judges of Judge Hall's day would have ever thought of doing. So our firm went about keeping track of every minute spent on a client's affair, including the time necessary to keep track of that time. Yep. The multiplying the accumulated time by dollar amounts that grew consistently over the years, leaving cost of living indices far behind. And of course, since our smallest entry on our time records was a tenth of an hour, after all, how far in the decimal system would you expect us to go? Exactly. Equivalent to 6 minutes. And as it was necessary to satisfy this new system that there be an entry for every phone call, no matter if it lasted only 15 seconds. But I tell you, you wouldn't expect us to ignore it, would you? Mathematics worked very nicely in our favor in computing bills. At first, this rewarding multiplication was done by hand. Then computers nicely came along, and what previously had been only a calculation that had a chance to be adjusted for other factors, such as, for instance, that, alas, we had lost a case for the client, now became the bare minimum of the true measure of the worth of what the lawyer had done. See? So it doesn't matter if we lose the cases. We're still getting paid. We'll still get paid. That's why we don't care about winning cases for our clients. After all, if the computer itself has come up with an amount that is accepted by auditors, why isn't the recipient of this symbol of unquestioned accuracy obligated to pay that amount? Who dares quarrel with a computer? Nowadays, who dares quarrel with the AI, right? No, see, I dare quarrel with a computer and a lawyer and a judge and anyone else who presumes that they have authority over me. Let's see. Where'd I go? Oh, yeah. And as this time is money, concept became gospel. The time necessary to get things done extended wondrously. Oh, yes, wondrously. See, this is also why it takes forever and 3 years to litigate something, because they will stretch it out to get so much money. It was not that the records were falsified, but simply that when one knows that the longer he or she works on the matter, the more compensation there will be. The matter at hand simply cries for more work. One more hour of research or one more legal motion resulting in one more hearing, etc., etc., etc. Then at about the same time computers became the accepted way of life, law firms began to use business managers who were usually, but not always, lawyers, but who were always selected for their business acumen rather than their professionalism. Which means getting the maximum dollars for the most prestigious clients that can be adduced to patronize their firm. Let me see where we're at so we don't go crazy on you guys. Yeah, see? Yes, at 136. All right, I'm going to pause here. Here. Because we're over an hour and 35 minutes. So I will pause here and try to come back. I'll try to be a little bit more organized too. I always say that, right? Well, thank you, Prairie, for always being awesome. See you guys in the next one.